events this week. Great to see you all here. That's right. We've got a great night planned for us here this evening, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. But first, Jane.
Yeah, because as Jamie's just said, this is the first of 4 evening events, and the rest of them are all in this rather super-duper leaflet here that starts off all just as a little thing like that. Hopefully you've all seen these, and if you open it out, all the information that you need is in here as to what's happening on the rest of the week, or the rest of this weekend. So tonight we're here with Fenella, and I'm telling you more about her later when I introduce her, looking at Rejection. And then tomorrow we've got the cafe again from 10 till 4. That went really well today. And if you're passing or got friends who might be passing, stop and have a coffee and a free cake, and just the time to have an informal chat with people. It's great. And then there's other events. So tomorrow night we're having the Rescued story with Lisa. And that's an amazing story. I've heard that one before as well. And then on Saturday, we've got the cafe again. And then we've got Mansell Morgan coming. And he's a violinist. And he tells his story and plays his violin. He's a man who can multitask. They're quite rare, aren't they? And then...
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And then on Sunday... You're all invited to come on Sunday morning when actually Andrew Ollerton won't be with us, but other things will be happening. And then on Sunday evening, we've got our final event, and that's with, I can't remember his first name now. Ken. I want to call him Kevin. Got the right first letter. Ken Woodburn, who's going to talk about his near-death experience. So it's a great week that we've got, a weekend that we've got lined up. And please do get involved if you're not already, and come along and join us.
Fantastic, thanks Jane. So yes, you are so welcome this evening, and we've got a wonderful night planned out. So we're going to start in a minute with an interview. Jane's going to interview Fenella with I guess a vulnerable and real life story, thinking along this kind of theme of rejection. And then I was chatting to Greg earlier, who's speaking tonight, saying, Greg was saying tonight we want to reject rejection and talk about the acceptance of Jesus. And I think in this present time, this present moment, there's a message that's much needed. And I hope we'll fill you with a sense of hope this evening before we go. And then Russell over here is going to be singing for us as well. So, and then in the midst of it, we're going to have a short break after the interview, and there will be cakes and drinks and things like that that will come out. What have we got? I don't know. Good question. You'll have to wait, Chris, and you'll find out. That's it. So over to you then, Jane.
Okay, and also just to say that if you would like prayer afterwards, there'll be people down there. In fact, I'll be one of them, wearing badges that say "Here to Help," and we'll be there to pray with you if you'd like prayer at the end. Okay.
Bro, nice one.
Right, Fenn, would you like to come up? Microphone. Well, thank you for coming tonight, Fenn, to share your story with us. Fenn, for those of you who don't know, is married to Des down here, and together they lead Father's House Church. And great church. I'm not encouraging people to leave this church, but if you ever want to have a refresher, if you want to call in at Father's House, I'm sure they'd be very welcome. I've dropped in a few times and always feel very welcome there. And Des and Fenn actually came from the Isle of Man about 4 years ago. I have to mention that because I'm from the Isle of Man originally, so I like to mention the homeland when I get a chance. And so they've been leading Father's House for just over 4 years, and you've just recently been able to move into a place of your own, haven't you? It's been a long time coming, yes. But it shows that God is faithful to the end there, doesn't it? Yeah. So we're going to hear something of Fenn's story about rejection. And like I said, I've heard this story before, and it really is a powerful life testimony. So, Fenn, from chatting to you previously, I know that your childhood was far from idyllic, and you faced a lot of rejection during that time. So I wonder if you would mind telling us about some of the things that happened to you when you were a child. Thanks.
I'm the youngest of 4 children, and I've got 2 older sisters who are 12 and 13 years older than me, and then a brother who's 3 years older than me. And my parents used to live in the Isle of Man, and they moved to England, and I was born in Leeds. Ooh. in the best county. Just saying. And my parents had a very tumultuous relationship, I would say. There was a lot of arguing and what have you. And my dad, bearing in mind my brother and I, there's only 3 years between us, my dad would take my brother out on trips and do things with my brother, which you would expect sometimes with a father and a son. But whenever I asked to go out with him, he would never take me out. And I remember at a very young age always wondering why he didn't take me out with him. And then you start to think, what's wrong with me? And I was only young, so the feelings didn't sort of linger, because you think about them as a child and then you forget about them in the next minute. But obviously, as you get older, they do take root. And I remember I kept asking my dad why he didn't take me out, and he kept telling me that he only had to take my brother out. He didn't have to take me out. And I could stay at home with my mum, and they did boys' things. And whenever I asked my brother what they did, my brother never told me either. So then that was double rejection, because I felt he was holding back on me. And I remember when I was about 8 years old, I think my dad had got fed up of me asking the question. So he took me out for a walk. Excuse me.
Would you like a drink?
No, it's okay. So he took me out for a walk, and I can remember exactly where we were, and remember walking up there, and I was really, really excited because my dad was taking me out somewhere without my brother, and it was really exciting, and because he's a great man, in a child's eyes, he was a good man. And he took me out for a walk, and we stopped, we called it the Ridge, and we stopped on the Ridge, and we stopped under a tree. And he said to me, I'm fed up of you asking these questions, so I'm now going to tell you why I don't take you out with me. He said, because you're not my child. So I was 8 years old. So I'm like, oh, okay. And this is significant. There was a squirrel in the tree at the time, and the squirrel was taking conkers off the tree, shelling them and then throwing the shells down on the floor, and they kept hitting my dad on the head, and it was hilarious. And he was getting really angry with this squirrel, because so we moved away from the squirrel, but it really took my attention anyway. So he said again, you're not my daughter. Your mum had an affair, and you're the product of the affair that your mum had, and so you're not my daughter. So I resent paying the £8 a month alimony that I have to pay for you. And that's why I don't take you out, because you've got nothing to do with me. And that was that. My mum and dad ended up getting divorced. And my dad's very gregarious, very lovely man. So I grew up with my dad as a friend rather than a father-daughter. And we got on really, really well. But he always maintained that I wasn't his child. And it does have an effect on you. So it has an effect on, as you're growing up, you start to see things through that rejection. You look at things through that rejection route without even knowing that you're doing it. So I was never good enough at school. I was never slim enough. I was never pretty enough. I was never enough for anything, because if I was enough, he'd love me. And but you don't realise it, and it comes out in all sorts of different ways. So for a lot of my working career, I grew up with a thing called imposter syndrome, and I always assumed that they were going to find out that actually I was the wrong person in that job, and I couldn't do the job, and something was going to go wrong. Well, actually, I was the best person for that role. And I think back now, and I think if I'd have only realised at that time that I was the right person in the right place, my life could have been a lot different. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago, I think, I was out for lunch with my mum. And my mum was talking about my dad, because even though they got divorced, she never stopped loving him. Even though she got remarried, he was always the love of her life. And she said, I've got a really funny story to tell you. So I said, what's that then? And she said, just before you were born, she said, my dad was a philanderer as well, and he'd had affairs, and he'd had an affair with my mum's sister. And obviously that affected her, and rejection kicked in there as well. And she said, I was fed up of him seeing all these other women, so I told him that I'd had an affair. She says, no, I never have, because I've always loved you, Dad. She says, but I told him I'd had an affair with his best friend. And so he put two and two together, and obviously they made up at that point. I was conceived, but he always believed that I was the child of his best friend, and I never was. I was absolutely, categorically his. I look so like my sisters, I can't believe that he even thought it. But I think because he'd said it for so long, he just had to continue on and doing it. So that it was really, really hard, and it was hard seeing him and having a relationship with him as a friend rather than having a relationship with him as a daughter. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, we had this quiet time at church, and God really spoke to me. And because I absolutely adore squirrels, they just make me smile when I see them. And he said, God clearly said to me, do you know the reason why you like squirrels so much? And I said, no, why is that then? And he said, because I put the squirrel in the tree. He says, because I knew that I knew the words that your dad was going to say to you, and I put that squirrel in the tree so that the words didn't have the devastating effect on you that they could have had. Now, I know they've had an effect on you, but that effect could have been even worse. So God was really even looking after me, even back then when I was 8 years old.
So when did Jesus actually come into your life? At what point did he become real to you?
Well, I grew up a Catholic. I went to Catholic school. My mum came from a very staunch Catholic family, but something happened to her. She was sold to a convent when she was 15 years old by her father, because she was illegitimate, and this is 95 years ago, so it was a big stigma back at that point. So she got sold to a convent when she was 15, but she ran away before she had to take her final vows, and her dad never spoke to her again. He rejected her, so the rejection was coming down through the family line. But she always believed that God was good. So I grew up knowing that God was good, and she sort of veered away from Catholicism, and she had a lot of Jewish friends. Now, for those that know the Jewish culture, everything is good. God is good, even when their feet are falling off and their fingers are being cut off. God is always good in the Jewish community. So I heard that all the time, and it settled with me that God is always good no matter what the circumstances. And I became a Christian when I was 18. I became a follower of Jesus when I was in my 30s, and there is a big difference between the two. Big difference between the two. So I knew about God. I then started a relationship with Jesus that fizzled out because it was never set on solid foundation. And then at 35 or 30, somewhere along those lines, I was married. I got married at 21, and then my husband had an affair, and we split up. And all the people that came around me, everyone that I knew were Christians. So I ended up going to church. I got invited to church for lunch. And I suppose because I know about church, I didn't just want to turn up at church for lunch. So I actually ended up going to church for the service, and I stayed in that church. And there was an Alpha course running, I was in the parish that Justin Welby had a parish church before he became Archbishop of Durham or whatever. Archbishop of Canterbury now, but he went to Durham first. Right. And I went on an Alpha course and recommitted my life to Jesus on the Alpha course. And at this point, Mike and I had split up. And I really believed that God was asking me to have another try with the marriage. So we were in separate houses, so we sold our houses. We hadn't got divorced, and we moved to the Isle of Man. And when we moved to the Isle of Man, I found out that he was still seeing the woman he had the affair with, and he was hoping to move her to the Isle of Man without me knowing, so that he could carry on both lives at that point. So it was a double rejection again at that time. And I was really cross. Oh, probably that's an understatement, but I can talk, yes, anyway.
Understandably so.
Understandably so. So I ended up going to a Christian camp with some of the people from church called Eagle Camp. I have no idea who that belongs to, but I remember going to this camp and going to a seminar, and I'd picked to go to a seminar. And when I got to the seminar, I'd actually gone the wrong way, and I was in a different seminar from the one I was intending to go on. God does these things. And this was a seminar on forgiveness, surprisingly. And so the lady stood there, and she was talking about, how easy it is to forgive, and I was getting angrier and angrier and angrier as she was speaking. And so at the end, when she said any questions, my hand had gone up before she'd even finished speaking. And my question to her was, well, it seems easy to forgive, but how do you forget? And she said, in order to forget, when you start to have the feelings about the people that you have thoughts about, so for me it was my husband and another woman, she said, you just bless them, just keep blessing them all the time, no matter what circumstances you're in, no matter if they're together or they're not together. You don't even have to think about it. Just ask God to bless them, because he loves them just as much as he loves you. That was a real revelation to me at that point. And so she said, and if you do that, I can guarantee it'll get easier. Well, after about 3 weeks, I'd even stopped thinking about it, and the hurt had stopped. It was absolutely amazing.
Wow. So these events, how have they impacted your life? Like, what would you say you've learned from these rejection experiences? I've learned that they go a lot deeper than you think that they do. I've learned that I think you learn to cope with them without realising that they're having an effect on you. So things like, I used to wonder why I reacted to things in the way I reacted to things, and it wasn't until God started to reveal things to me that I realised it was because I was expecting rejection all the time. I was never good enough. As I say, imposter syndrome at work. I just never felt that I was adequate enough for anyone, and it wasn't. We did something at church not so long ago called the Circle of Responsibility. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. And you actually put in whatever it is that you're dealing with. So for me, it was rejection, and you have a circle, and it's like sections of a circle. And you work out how much of whatever it is that you're coping with is your fault. And I realised that the rejection I had from my father was never ever my fault, because he'd rejected me before I was even born. So it wouldn't have mattered if I was a virtuoso or an opera singer or a page 3 model or whatever is the best thing in the whole world. It would never have made any difference, because the rejection was always there in the first place. And so it's taken me an long time to get to the point of it was never my fault. But everything that's happened since then has been my fault, because I've allowed that to influence me. So I'm now trying to take back all the land that the enemy's taken away from me, and believe in myself a little bit more, and understand who I am, and understand how God sees me, because no human can love me the way that God loves me. And it is such a freeing experience to know that I have that love, and the only opinion of me that matters is his opinion. And if you don't like me, then you don't know me, because I'm quite a nice person. But it has taken me a long time to get to this point. But God has shown me so much through it. And I seem to be able to pick out people who are going through similar things, and God reveals words and things to me for those people. So during all this journey and during these different periods of rejection, was there ever a time when you doubted God and doubted that he was there with you, or felt angry with him about anything? No, never felt angry with him, and I can actually put my hand on my heart and say I never have. I've often wondered why things have happened, and I've often wondered why God allowed things to happen. And I've realised that actually we're just a product of circumstances and consequences from other people's actions. And, there's a scripture that talks about sins of your father. And I believe that a lot of the rejection that I suffered has come down through family lines, because my father was rejected by his dad, and my mum was rejected by her parents, and how they lived their lives has had an effect on how I've lived my life. So I actually want to stop it now, so that it doesn't affect our children anymore, or it doesn't affect my life anymore, or it doesn't affect our grandchildren, because it needs to stop, because Jesus died
Jesus died to set me free. And I've been living so many years not being free that actually I'm really enjoying the journey now, because it's changing my viewpoint on absolutely everything.
Wow. So, finally, Fenn, what advice or what would you say to anybody who's here this evening who's perhaps either been through rejection and is nursing hurts from the past, or is going through a period of rejection now? What would you have you any advice for them?
Well, everybody's journey is different, and I'm not an expert in this. I've just experienced it. But Jesus really did die for us to set us free, and I think it is a truth that we're not grasping hold of. It's a truth that we listen to, but we don't actually believe it, because we'd rather live with the hurts that we have, and we'd rather live in that safe place because we're too scared to move into an area that's unknown to us. So we sit and hold on to these things because it makes us who we are, but it actually doesn't. Only Jesus makes us who we are, because we're meant to be more like him. And he suffered the worst rejection in the world, and my rejection compared to his is absolutely nothing at all.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much, Fenn. And I mean, I've been sat here as the interviewer, but as the interviewer, I've been touched by what you've been saying, particularly in that last bit there. And I'm sure there may be people listening too who have been moved by what Fenn has said. So if you want to talk further in the prayer time, do feel free to do so. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a pause, and some cake will appear on the back table over there, and we're going to refill your coffees and your drinks, hot drinks over here, and then after that, Greg is going to come and share a message with us.
There was actually one other thing,
Right,
which we're so slick here, aren't we? We've planned this so well. Which was one thing that Fenn mentioned that was really transformational for you was going to that Alpha course. And we're going to be running one of those after this week. There's little invites on your table to it. And if you use the QR code or go to the link, you can sign up for that course. But just whilst the cake is coming out and getting ready, we're going to watch a quick trailer of the Alpha course. You have to excuse the guy's voice, it's incredibly posh, but if you can look past that, it's a great course. So cue video, and then out comes the cake.
Fenn.
And if you're watching online, bear with us, we'll be back in a few minutes.
Every day we ask so many questions. What should I wear? What's the weather going to be like? How am I going to fit everything in? But then there are those bigger questions, like, why am I here? Where am I heading? Is there more to life than this?
I had arrived at an answer to the most important issue that we humans ever deal with. Is there a God? And I had arrived there without ever really looking at the evidence. And I was supposed to be a scientist.
At 28, I had gotten many of the things that I thought I wanted. My girlfriend was on the cover of magazines, I had a Beamer, and I was so unhappy. It was a realization maybe that I would never find happiness where I was looking for it.
I think for so many years, I always just strived to be strong in myself. All I needed was me and my buddies, and, we'd be like invincible. But the truth is, none of us are.
I found purpose, I found meaning, I found hope. God took something so broken and made it a beautiful art piece.
Alpha is a place where you can be yourself. You can say what you think and challenge everything. No question is too complex or too simple. And what your point of view is as important as anyone else's.
we are going on a journey together, an adventure to explore the questions of life, faith, and meaning.
replenishing your glasses, grabbing any cake that you want, and coming back, taking your seats. Let's just begin with the second half after the interval. Great, thank you. So, as Jamie already said, my name is Greg Downs, and I'm from Lancaster lad. I was born here at the infirmary 53 years ago now, in 1969. But I went away to university when I was 19. I've not lived back in Lancaster since, so I've lived longer in the south now than in the north. So if my northern accent is slightly, the edges rubbed off, forgive me. I'm still in, the proud northerners go, born in the north, die in the north. Have you heard that one? I'm probably not going to die. I mean, who knows? Statistically, it's possible, but it's unlikely, seeing as I live down south. But I always love coming back to my home city. And thanks so much to Fenn for sharing earlier. As you'll see in this bit here, we've actually got quite a bit in common, Fenn, in terms of our background and things that went wrong. And I wrote down a quotation, and it was to do with my training as a clergyman. So I'm an Anglican vicar, have been for 25 years now. And my last job, I was a lecturer at one of the Oxford colleges, Wycliffe Hall in Oxford University. And as well as teaching theology, half our students were trainee vicars, so trainee vicars for the Church of England. And my area wasn't pastoral stuff in terms of counselling and psychology, all that kind of thing. But I remember it from my training. And one of the things I remember in my training was a counsellor said this, someone who is an expert in psychology and counselling and helping people get over some of the trauma that we all experience in life. None of us are immune to it, are we? We live in this, well, Christians would say, this fallen world, a world in which all is not as it should be. All is not as our good God intended, and He is good. God is good. Anyway, this is the quotation. It's a little bit fatalistic, and it says this: if you're accepted and loved, you will live your whole life in the positive light of that and get the benefit without even realizing it. But if you're rejected and not loved effectively, you will live your whole life in the negative light of that and never fully recover from it. So this is basically what a kind of pastoral psychologist said. And it's based really just on experience of talking to many people. And it's actually, obviously, the reason someone is saying something like this, it's for many people, of course, it's true. If you've grown up and you're fortunate enough to come from a home and your experience is one of being accepted and loved unconditionally, you live your whole life in the positive light of that and get the benefit from it, and you won't even realize it. In other words, it's just like second nature. You won't even realize the benefit that you're basking in the reflected glory of. But the opposite is true. If you're rejected, if you've experienced rejection, if you're not loved effectively, you'll live your whole life in the negative light of that, and you'll never fully recover from it. Well, I agree with that quotation in many ways, but not entirely. And Fenn is proof that it is possible to recover from it. And I'm going to weave a little bit of my story in too, and I think I'm proof as well that it's possible to recover from it. What obviously this quotation is not doing, it's not putting God into the equation. It's not putting the possibility of change, transformation into the equation. But without God, it's pretty hopeless. In many ways, there are some good psychologists out there. There are people we can go and see and get therapy and talk things through. But for many of us, it's kind of, we end up walking with a limp, perhaps for the rest of our lives. One of the things that I'll do each of the nights as well is perhaps recommend a little bit of further reading for people to go further in terms of the topic. And we've got we've got a bookstall at the back, and there's a book that I think has come out fairly recently by a friend of mine, Michael Otts, and last year, 2021. And it's called Making Sense of Life. It's a brilliant little book, and one chapter in particular, chapter 9, is called Making Sense of Love. Why is love so important and yet so hard to find? And that chapter continues the theme of what we're thinking about tonight. Love is so important. To be loved effectively is so vital for our development and our well-being, our mental health. We think about that a lot more than we used to, and we're more open about that as a society, thank goodness, than we used to. Love it's imperative to be loved well, to be loved effectively. So why is it so important? And yet it's so hard to find. And so that chapter speaks about that. And these books, are they a pound each, Jamie, that we're giving them? They're free. They're free. Oh, yeah, sorry. They're free. They're free. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. The bookstall is free. The only thing we'd say is please do just take one if you intend to read it and use it, because I know sometimes it's easy, isn't it, to take one away with best intentions and it gathers dust somewhere. So please, with our compliments, take one away. This is the one that I'm recommending tonight. But please, if you do have some kind of intention to delve into it and read it, that would be absolutely fantastic. So tonight we're thinking about this topic of rejection, really. That's the theme that we've been thinking about, and Fenn has guided us through that wonderfully, kicked it off, really, in terms of getting us thinking about, the damage that can be done by experiencing rejection, but also that there is hope for change, there's hope for transformation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this series of talks this particular week. So lack of love or rejection, to be not accepted, to not perceived that we are accepted, can be devastating indeed. I think we all know that. We don't need a psychologist to tell us that. Lance Armstrong, here's a quotation from Lance Armstrong. He said this. He said, a boo, he said, is a lot louder than a cheer. What he means by that, of course, is that sadly, so often negativity, when we are criticized, when we are rejected, that can actually have more of an effect, sometimes than encouragement that we can be deaf to. Here's another quotation, this time from Marilyn Monroe, the famous Hollywood singer of yesteryear. She said in her life, sometimes I feel as if my whole life has been one big rejection. So despite her glamour, despite her looks, despite her success, fraternizing with JFK, all the rest of it, her life ended in sadness, of course. Almost certainly she took her own life, very sadly. She feels that her life, despite everything, has been one big rejection. That's the phrase that she used. And here's another final quotation, which said this: if you live your life for acceptance, then you'll die from people's rejection. If you live your life just for people's acceptance, then you're going to die from their rejection. And yet the problem is most of us do, of course. It's human nature. Partly, I would say, it's how God's intended us in a way to live from that place of acceptance. More of that a little bit further on. But we all do that. If we live our life for acceptance, then the danger is we're going to die from people's rejection. And we all experience rejection in different ways, don't we? I just went to see my 87-year-old mother in a nursing home in Lancaster tonight, just before I came here. 87 in a few weeks, and I was there doing a few final jots to my talk tonight. And she said, last minute as usual, Greg. She said, she doesn't change, even though I'm 53 now. Yes, Mum, yes, Mum. Last minute as usual. Don't know how you get away with it. But anyway. And then she said, what are you talking about tonight anyway? So I said, rejection. And she said, I've never experienced rejection. Have you? She said. And I said, yes, I have, Mum, I have. When have you experienced rejection? she said. Anyway, more of that in a minute. It's got a certain irony, that question from my dear Mama. But we all, the point is, it's naive for her to say that, and for my mum, it's got layers of denial attached to it, as we'll find out in just a moment. Because we all experience, it's part of being human, living in a world that is fallen, i.e. a world in which all is not as it should be. We experience rejection, don't we? And on the blurb, it said it could be experience of family, it could be experience of rejection with family, a rejection with friends, rejection with work. And so with family, I'm the middle one of 3 boys, and I'm the only sibling that speaks to the other 2. My older brother is completely ostracized from the younger brother. They don't have any contact. Mrs. Henderson knows this lady here, Mrs. Henderson. She taught us all in Sunday school years ago up in Bowerham, little church there at the end of Wellington Road. And the older one, Mrs. Henderson, Sylvia, no contact. Howard and Heath, they're called. They have no contact with each other, so that's in family. Okay, what about friends? I remember I had a best mate at university called Mark. He and I were thick as thieves. And we used to go walking together, all kinds of stuff. And he came to faith, actually, when I was at university. He came to become a Christian. And then after university, he as it happened, stopped being a Christian, and we lost touch for about 10 years. And then I contacted him out the blue. It must have been about 4 years ago. I contacted him I've got his number from somebody. I phoned him up, and it was kind of stilted down the phone. It was kind of, I could just tell he wasn't doing cartwheels to hear from his former best mate from university. And then about 5 minutes into this rather stilted conversation, Mark said to me, he said, I don't really want to pick up, we've sort of lost touch now, haven't we, for over 10 years. I'm not really interested in picking up in the friendship, and, we've moved on kind of thing. And I said, yeah, all right, Mark, yeah, all right, mate. But kind of it was like a bit of a rejection. Obviously, I'd not been in touch with him for 10 years, but clearly there's a rejection there, isn't there? He was obviously saying, let's give it a miss. Then there's work. I just got made redundant during COVID. And it's not a bit of a pity party. I'm not the only one. There's hundreds of people, thousands of people around the United Kingdom who lost their jobs because of COVID. Some people lost their lives. I had a friend of mine who died because of COVID. So I'm not by no means the only one, but the college where I was working had a fiscal crisis caused by COVID and decided to make my position redundant, so my position ceased to exist. And that, I internalized that more as a rejection than I thought I would. I couldn't help but think in my head, redundancy, why did they pick me? There was a small faculty of, not many, eight faculty, but anyway, the point is they picked me out of these 8 people. And then I thought to myself, well, when you've got to make somebody redundant, you pick the weakest link, don't you? This was the kind of narrative that was going around in my head, this sort of stuck record for a while. And I realized I was internalizing it in terms of rejection. So we all experience rejection, and I do believe that this thing tonight, it's obviously it's part of this week of events that we're doing for Holy Week. It's Maundy Thursday today, and the idea is that this is to invite people along who are maybe not connected to church, maybe they're not sure. People who are not sure perhaps they're Christians, maybe they believe in God and they're thinking it through. And that may be you. That may be you tonight. And if that's you, you're extremely welcome here tonight if you're not usually part of the church crowd. But actually many people here are part of the usual church crowd who are living out their faith in community. And you might be thinking, hey, this is a kind of just designed for people who are maybe not yet Christians. But actually I think this is really some amazing food for thought we've got kicked off to start with by Fenn, thinking about this idea of rejection. I think it's going to be a blessing to all of us, in terms of it's been a blessing to me as I've got my head around thinking through some of this stuff afresh. So we all experience rejection, and maybe it could be something innocuous like young love, first love, maybe when we're teenagers, and unrequited love. Don't know whether anyone can remember that far back. And I remember one episode was when I was training to be a clergyman. I was funny enough, I trained at the college in Oxford where I'm now, where I was a lecturer. So I've just been lecturing at the college where, as a 23-year-old young chap, I went to train to be a vicar. And this was 25 years ago, and the college was all male then, and the reason why the Church of England didn't have women vicars then, hard to believe, but 25 years ago we didn't have women vicars, and so the college was a bit of an all-male preserve, all these blokes training to be vicars, and but occasionally there were one or two women who were in the college because they were on sabbatical. They came for like study leave, and when I was there was one. I was in my early 20s, and there was a young woman in her 20s who was there on study leave from Russia, and her name was Katya. And Katya was she was an Orthodox Russian postulant of a nun. Now, what that basically means she was training to be a nun. A bit like, do you remember Sister Maria in The Sound of Music? She was the postulant nun who went to work for the Von Trapp family and ended up leaving her life of nunnery. And remember that? Anyway, so Sister Katya was a postulant nun, and I felt a bit sorry for Katya because she did look not very happy a lot of the time. She kind of wore an upside down smile, and bless her, and she spoke like a Bond villain. And she did. No, she did. I mean, I felt sorry for her. The other boys in the college didn't speak to her. And I'd say to her, and partly because she had this kind of melancholic Eastern European thing going on. Sorry if you're Eastern European. It doesn't mean that everybody's melancholic. The Brits can be a bit miserable too. Anyway, but I'd say to her, hey, Katya, how are you doing today? And she'd go, not good. That's what she'd say. How are you doing, Katya? And she'd go, not good, Greg, not good. And then we used to have a kind of pigeonhole thing where you could put notes in people's pigeonhole, and she used to send me little notes. I was only 23, single young guy. I used to get notes from her. Dear Greg, how are you today? I love Katya. Oh, that's nice, the sister nun, Orthodox nun lady. She's being nice. Anyway, but then one day I went to my pigeonhole and I got a letter from her, a little message, in the pigeonhole that said this, and it got me a bit worried. It said, Dear Greg, I think I'm falling in love with you. Love, Katya. So I thought, oh no. I was shocked. I was single myself. I mean, she wasn't my glass of vodka, so I wasn't worried. For that. But I just thought, I don't want to rob this woman of a kind of a nun-like vocation, and Anyway, then one particular day, I arrived into the upper common room at college, and Sister Katya was there, and she said, Greg. I said, yeah, what is it? And she said, I need to speak to you. And I said, what do you want to speak to me about? I was a little bit naive. This story, by the way, is a little bit dated. It's 25 years old, so if you read it through a kind of safeguarding prism now, please don't complain to me. Complain to the leaders of the churches if you want to make any complaints. Anyway, so she said, Greg, I need to speak to you. And I said, what is it? She said, not here. She said, in my room. So now then, in those days, still you had a kind of like a study bedroom. It was like an all-in-one thing, with your desk and your bed and all this kind of thing. Anyway, so somewhat innocently, I walked into Katya's room, and first, she shut the door behind me, and she flicked the bolt on the door. It's honestly true. And she barricaded herself against the door, put her hands behind like this, and she said this, and these are exact words that she said. She said, Greg, she said, you are a temptation from the devil. Kiss me. And she did that. Anyway, so basically I rejected Katya. I ran away. I did a bit of run away, but like Joseph from Potiphar's wife. And but she got a huge rejection for poor Katya. She's been in therapy ever since. No, I don't know, but she might have been. She's probably got over it. She's probably the Mother Superior of a convent in St. Petersburg now, so all is well. But anyway, joking aside, obviously, rejection is no laughing. Obviously, that's a bit funny. We can laugh about unrequited first love. That wasn't my first, but we could joke about things like that. But it's as Fenn has demonstrated to us earlier. It's we laugh about these things. It's a coping mechanism. But rejection is no laughing matter. It's a serious. It's a serious thing. Okay, back to my mum. So, I'm from a broken home. I grew up the middle one of three boys, and there was just my mum around because my dad and my mum got divorced when I was 3. There was no contact with my dad, and because he was an alcoholic, so he wasn't allowed to have custody of the 3 boys, just in case that was a danger. And I think I always thought to myself, I'm going to go and look him up one day. And he lived down in Liverpool. And then news came through when I was 17. His sister, my auntie, knocked on the door at Wellington Road, where I lived up in Bowerham, Wellington Road, and didn't really know my Auntie Mary. And anyway, the news that she brought through was that my dad had died. He'd had a massive heart attack, aged 51, and he died possibly alcohol-induced. And I used to keep a diary in those days. And I remember my diary entry read the next day. It said, I cried myself to sleep last night for a man I never knew. I remember that's what I wrote. I cried myself to sleep for a man I never knew. So, you know, as a 17-year-old kid, obviously cried myself to sleep for this guy. I didn't even know him. Dad was a blank for me. Dad wasn't a, it was a blank. I didn't have a dad growing up. But I think I always thought I'll go and look him up when I'm 18. And I was just a year before I turned 18. He died of this heart attack. And my mum and him had a pretty acrimonious divorce. And she was being, even tonight, she was being negative about my father. He's long dead, died when I was 17. But she's still hurt. She's an 87-year-old lady. She's still carrying around those hurts from the divorce, from the marriage that went wrong. And that's why I laughed slightly to myself, not out loud, when she said, I've never been rejected. She said, and have you ever been rejected? And I laughed about that because a few years ago, years and years ago, I went and had some kind of counseling. And this counselor, the talking therapy, this is years ago, they're trying to help you deal with your stuff, don't they? And what this therapist did, what this counselor did many years ago, they said, okay, Greg, there's one word that governs, if I had to pick one word that governs your life, it's this: rejection. That's what a therapist told me years ago, as a young guy. There's one word that governs your life, it's rejection. Now, as I say, that doesn't mean it should, or certainly from a Christian point of view, it doesn't have to. And my story is one of grace, like Fenn's, one of healing, one of restoration, and we'll come to that in a moment. But this is why it was kind of slightly comedic, my mum actually saying that she'd never experienced rejection, and she'd have you. Anyway, I was chatting to her earlier tonight. I said, Mum, do you remember? I said, you used to say to me as a kid, I just said that this is tonight. I said to my mum, now we've got some children in the room, haven't we? So I'm gonna censor what she used to say. But when she used to say this as a kid, she didn't censor it. And I said, Mum, this is earlier tonight. I said, do you remember when I was a kid? I was a cheeky kid, misbehaving. And I said, Mum, you sometimes used to do a little put down, and you'd say to me, you think you're it, and you're only S-H-I-T. So I said, I just told my 87-year-old mum that tonight. And she said, well, I was only joking. She said, it was Scouse humour. She's Liverpudlian, my mum. She said, it was Scouse humour, Liverpudlian humour. But I didn't tell her tonight, because now is not the time. But you can imagine that really hurt me as a kid. When my mum said, you think you're it and you're only, it's kind of rejection, isn't it? It's okay, but she may not have meant it like that. It may have been her Scouse humour. Who knows what it was. And then she said to me this. She said, oh, the only reason I said that is my dad said that. And I said, oh, great, yeah, fine. So her dad said it to her, Scouse humour. And anyone who's from Liverpool in tonight? Anyone know? So, because I was born in Lancaster, but my parents were Liverpudlians there, but their parents were Liverpudlians. And my mum always referred to herself as a proud Scouse. And I'm very nervous using that phrase now, because I got told off by Ken Dodd once. I met Ken Dodd. And I said my mum was a Scouser, and he said, you shouldn't say Scouser, it's Liverpudlian. Scouse is a very rude word, he said. So having been told off by the great Ken Dodd, Sir Ken Dodd, I'm always scared about using the term Scouser. Anyway, so my mum said it was Scouse humour. She said, that's what my dad said to me. And my mum, I reckon, the reason why I inherited this rejection thing as a kid is that she was rejected by her parents. And the reason she was rejected as a parent is her Liverpudlian parents, Charlie and Ivy, they dated when my granny was, these days we think it was underage, she was sort of 16, 17, and my granddad, Charlie, was a bit older, 17, 18, and my granddad got her pregnant out of wedlock, and this was you can imagine, this was in the 30s, 1930s, so my granddad, Charlie, 17-year-old Liverpudlian lad, got this young girl, 16, pregnant. And they did the thing that you did in those days, and maybe that was not altogether a bad thing than the option that we seem to alight upon these days. But anyway, they did what they did in those days, which is they got married. They got married, and quickly, shotgun wedding. And my mum was born. My mum was born, conceived out of wedlock, but born just in wedlock. But because of that, I think my granddad always resented my mum. And this is piecing it together later, putting my kind of vicar's hat on. And my granddad, I think he always resented my mum because I think he felt I married this woman and it was just a night of passion, and I married her because it was the right thing to do. They stayed married, by the way, to the end of the days. They were pretty happy in many ways. But I think he resented her because he thought, you are the reason. You're on blaming his own issues. You are the reason. And so he rejected my mum, I think. And then they had another child, a boy. And they loved this boy, just like they loved this boy, Alan, my Uncle Alan. And they doted on him, they loved him, and they didn't. My granddad particularly, similar story to yours, and they didn't because, my mum was biologically theirs, but she was conceived in sin. Actually it was in Liverpool 8, I think it was. But anyway, there were, as we used to say, she was conceived out of wedlock. And so there was a lot of shame and all the rest of it. And so my mum was rejected, and her marriage to my dad broke up. And then she had a whole series of relationships, and one after the other, they didn't work out. One after the other, these relationships failed. And there was the first one she had was with this guy called Barry. And Barry moved in. She cohabited with this guy, Barry, shortly after my dad left. And her little boys were 5, I was 3. Younger one was 1. And so she thought the best thing to do would be to bring up the children. She thought this was the best thing to do, to bring up the children to believe that this guy was our dad. She thought, in her wisdom, she thought this would be a thing to do. So my earliest memories were not knowing the story that my dad left at 3. My earliest memories were growing up with mum and dad. Mum and dad, but dad wasn't my dad. It was this guy called Barry, it turns out, but he wasn't my dad. Anyway, like a lot of people, my mum went from bad relationship to bad relationship, and Barry was a drinker in the same way my dad was a drinker, and so I remember as a kid drunken rows and arguments and all this kind of thing, and there's one particular drunken row, which was the straw that broke the camel's back, where my dad left, dad inverted commas, he wasn't really my dad, and in this row, I remember I was cowering in the corner at 2 Wellington Road, and my dad, inverted commas, said to my mum, "Tell them," and she said, "No, don't tell them." And then he said, "I'm going to tell them." And she said, "No, not now. But now is not the time. Now is not the time." And she came over, and I'm not going to censor. I'm not going to censor this bit. The 3 of us were cowering in the corner, and in a alcohol-fueled drunken row, my dad looked at the 3 of us, and he said this: "Right, you 3 bastards, I'm not your dad." It's rejection, isn't it? It's as a kid, it's rejection. I mean, you know what that feels like. And they split up, and it was within a year that Dad, inverted commas, Barry, took his own life. Another rejection for the pile. So I know what it is. I was thoroughly identifying with your story, Fenn. I know what it is to experience rejection. And yet, I would say to you, right now in my life, age 53, I'm embarrassingly happy. Embarrassingly, because I realize a lot of people, have got a tough life. And sometimes I kind of keep it to myself how happy I am, because it's kind of slightly awkward. I'm married to a wonderful woman, Tammy. We've got 2 gorgeous daughters, Anastasia and Trinity. I call them my 3 favorites. The three F's in my life that are the most important are faith, my faith in Jesus Christ. We'll come to that in a minute. Family, my 3 favorites, my wife and 2 daughters, and my friends. I really love my friends, and I value friendship greatly in life. And only today I was speaking to somebody on the phone, and they said to me on the phone today as I was driving up from Stoke-on-Trent, they said, "One of the things I appreciate about you, Greg," they said, "you're always full of joy. You are such a joy." And I can honestly say that it's not fake. I'm not going around sort of feeling woe is me. It's genuine. So how come if it's not fake, to take my word for it, if I feel genuinely happy, if I feel genuinely full of joy, if I feel incredibly blessed, if I wouldn't swap my life for anyone's on the planet, how does that compute with the autobiography I've just given you of rejection and, I guess you could say, verbal abuse, all kinds of stuff that went on in my childhood? Well, the short answer, and I really encourage you to come back tomorrow night and the night after, we've got a whole series of talks, and we're going to be exploring different themes. And I do invite you to bring, or invite any friends who are not part of the church or not yet Christians. Do invite them along. There's this leaflet here that's got like a menu of the talks that we've got throughout the week. But in essence, how did things change for me? Well, essentially, things changed for me because I had an encounter with Jesus Christ when I was 11 years of age. I became a Christian when I was 11. And I sometimes say my mum wasn't a church goer, she was a church sender. So we lived on Wellington Road, and a single-parent family. And there was one particular day, we went out for a walk, it was in the snow, and there was a little church at the bottom of our road called the Church of the Nazarene. And this Church of the Nazarene, there was some kind of party going on, and my mum was a bit curious, so she went into this, I think it was a Christmas party that was going on, and whoever it was said, we do a Sunday school. Why don't you enroll your kids into Sunday school? And so my mum thought, a great little bit of free childcare on a Sunday. She had no intention of going herself. As I say, she was a church sender, not a church goer. She enrolled me into Sunday school, and that's where this lady here, Mrs. Henderson, just give us a wave, was one of the Sunday school teachers. She told me tonight she's taught children for 55 years. Let's give her a round of applause for that. And that's when I first heard about Jesus Christ. And that little church sent me off on a camp. I might share in more detail the story tomorrow night or the night after. But that's when I first heard about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And as an 11-year-old boy, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And what I found is that as I got to know Jesus more, Jesus was not the one that I worshipped, who was a distant deity, who was unable to sympathize with all that I'd gone through as a kid, all this rejection, all this pain, this verbal abuse, all this stuff that really my life should be pretty shipwrecked. And by the way, my brother's is. I've got two boys, and I was just saying to Mrs. Henderson tonight, my elder brother got into drugs at 16, left school. He's nearly 60, never had a job in his entire life. And, he's on kind of all kinds of disability benefits. His life really is shipwrecked. But that's another story. But I found that Jesus was not one who was unable to help me. In fact, here's a verse from the New Testament in the Bible. And it says this. It says, Hebrews 4, verse 15, it says this, "For we do not have one who is unable to sympathize with our weakness." And so what it says is Jesus Christ is one who can sympathize. I would say further, he can empathize. You know the difference between sympathy and empathy. He can empathize. Sympathy is, being able to, identify with you. Empathize is, someone knows what it's like because they've experienced it themselves. I could empathize with Fenn tonight because I'd been there. Her story in some senses was my own story, even though the characters were different. Well, this is what it says about Jesus in Isaiah 53. This is a prophecy of Jesus that predicted his coming to the earth hundreds of years before. The prophet Isaiah said this of Jesus. It said, "He," that's Jesus Christ, "was despised and rejected by human beings. He was a man of suffering, and he was acquainted with pain." And that's true. If you read the life of Jesus, Jesus experienced rejection. Jesus experienced suffering. In John chapter 1, verse 11, and any of you want to get into reading the Bible, we've got these at the back called Living in Christ. It's the Gospel of John. The Bible is 66 books that make up the Bible. Biblios is the Greek word which means library. It's a library of books, actually. But here's one book called the Gospel of John. It's like a biography about Jesus. So if you've never read the Bible, let me recommend that, as well as my friend's book, Making Sense of Life. You could take this away for free as well. And here's a quotation from John's Gospel. It says this, John chapter 1, verse 11. It says, "He," that's Jesus, "came to his own, and his own received him not." So Jesus was rejected by his own Jewish people. Jesus was rejected by his own people. He was abandoned by his best friends. We're told that one of his best friends, Peter, denied him 3 times. He was handed over to the Roman authorities who actually executed him. He was nailed to a cross, the Roman form of execution. That's why we've got this cross here to remind us that Jesus was executed by this barbarous form of the death penalty, the Roman execution it was. He was handed over by his own people, the Jewish people, to be executed. But then it says this, John chapter 1, verse 12. This is the following verse. It said, "But all who did receive him, he gave them the right to become the children of God. That's what it says. So he was rejected by his own, but anyone who received Jesus Christ, he gave them the right to become the children of God. And my story, and I think Fenn's is the same, is that as I got to know this Jesus Christ, this Son of God, who was rejected by men and women, who was despised, who was hated, who was killed, as I got to know this Jesus Christ, what I found is acceptance. What I found was approval. What I found was unconditional love. What I found was affirmation. And this wasn't just, kind of pie in the sky sort of therapy stuff. This was truth applied to the very level of my heart, which brought me incredible healing and has brought me incredible joy. And I'm still very much a work in progress. I'm not standing up tonight saying, I'm sorted, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm perfect. I'm not. My mum would tell you that. And my wife would as well, actually. My wife would tell you that as well. But I'm on a journey of becoming, like all people should be. All Christians certainly are those on a journey of becoming, that is, becoming more like Jesus Christ. But Jesus Christ has not just rescued me, he died on the cross to rescue me so that I could be forgiven, so that I could be free, so I could become a child of God by adoption. But Jesus Christ has and is healing me. And Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so what he did for me, and is still doing for me, if he's not started doing that for you yet, he can do that for you also. Well, we're just going to have a little musical interlude now, just for a few minutes, and then we're going to conclude our evening. So I just invite our musician up once more for just a little musical interlude before we carry on.
Draw near to me, for I have drawn near to you. Pull on the strings of my heart, for I long to respond to you. No, my love is for you, and all my love is yours. And all my love is for you, and all my love is yours. Draw near to me, for I have drawn near to you. Pull on the strings of my heart, for I long to respond to you. No, my love is for you, and all my love is yours. And all my love is for you, and all my love is yours. And I've made a place for you. So come on, things are possible here. So come on, come on. And I've made a place for you here. So come on, so come on. You know things are possible here. So come on, so come on. You know my love is for you, and you know my love is yours. You know my love is for you, and you know my love is yours.
Well, thank you for that. And those beautiful words are words that are in the Bible, in the book in the New Testament. It says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And it really is as simple as that we just need to make that decision to draw near to the God who is there, the God who accepts us, the God who loves us, the God who is the perfect Father, by the way, for those who give their lives to Jesus Christ. And I finished, didn't I, by quoting that verse, John 1:11. He came to his own, but his own received him not. But then it says in verse 12, John 1 verse 12, but to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave them the right to become children of God. And when we turn and accept Jesus Christ into our lives, that's the miracle that takes place. God adopts us into his family as his children, as his sons by adoption, as his daughters by adoption. That's my testimony tonight. That's one of the reasons that I've known healing in my life is through that. That's Fenn's story, isn't it? That you're a daughter of the King, a daughter of the living God. And it's given to us freely. We just need to turn to him and receive him. Whether or not we've experienced profound rejection in our life, like I said, I guess all of us have experienced rejection one way or another, but whether it's been of a kind of more kind of moderate, livable level or whatever, rather, or something deep and profound like Fenn and I have shared tonight, nonetheless, we find acceptance, we find affirmation, we find approval, we find unconditional love with God becoming our Heavenly Father when we give our lives to Jesus Christ. So I'm going to conclude with finishing our evening now. I'm going to conclude tonight with a simple prayer. And the prayer goes like this. Let me read it first of all to us. It's a prayer that I wrote just earlier this evening for the purpose of this evening. And it goes like this. It says, Dear God, I turn to Jesus now, your only Son. I believe in his name. I turn from my sin. It's everything I've said wrong, done wrong, and thought wrong. I turn from my sin to your Son. I receive him right now, and I become your child. Fill me with your Holy Spirit. That's the power and the presence of God who comes to live within us. Fill me with your Holy Spirit. Help me live for you. Amen. And I would just invite anyone here tonight, perhaps who's never prayed a prayer like that, you've never become a Christian, a true Christian, a follower of Jesus, to pray this prayer along with me as I pray it as a prayer just now. Could be that you have prayed a prayer like this maybe many years ago, but you know you've not been living it for months, who knows, maybe years, and maybe you need to pray it as a recommitment to him tonight. So I'm going to pray this prayer now. I'm going to just pray it out loud and pause at the end of each line. And I just invite us to just bow our heads and pray this prayer. And invite anyone particular, we can all pray it as a kind of form of reconsecration to God. But in particular, I'm thinking tonight, anyone perhaps praying this for the first time to become a Christian, or someone who is praying this prayer as a recommitment to God to say, have my life back again. And just as we've got our heads bowed now and we're praying, just as I lead us in this prayer in just a second. If that's you, if you're going to pray this prayer with me in a second, could I just invite you, just raise your right hand just where you are. Just raise your right hand in the room if you're praying this prayer as a first-time commitment to Jesus Christ, or a recommitment to him. Thank you. You do put your hands down. So that's one or two people here. There may well be others, but here's the prayer. Dear God, I turn to Jesus now, your only Son. I believe in his name. I turn from my sin to your Son. I receive now the right to become your child. Fill me with your Holy Spirit. Help me live for you. Amen. Just one more thing before I get down, finish the evening. What we've got is these little feedback forms on the table. Do stick around, by the way. Replenish your glass and get more crisps or cake before you go. But we've got these little feedback forms that we'd love you to fill in. There's some pens on the table, and it says, what do you think? Any feedback would be helpful. And then there's different options. If you're a guest here, you might want to tick the first one. Count me in. I want to follow Jesus. So if you prayed that prayer, if you'd like to tick that, there were one or two of you that raised your hand. Just tick that one. Count me in. I'd like to follow Jesus. But equally, you might want to find out more. Obviously, it's a big thing to surrender your life to Jesus, to say you're a Christian. You want to find out more, you can tick that one. Or you can say, I already attend a local church. There are many people here who are already a part of a church in Lancaster or the environs. There's a place there just for your name, phone number, if you will, an email, and anyone that you came with. So that would be really helpful to us. If you did pray that prayer as a first-time commitment or a recommitment, do come and chat to me or one of the team here. Certainly, we'd love you to take a gospel away with you, and maybe one of these books as well. And it'd be an opportunity, good to have the opportunity as well to talk with you a little bit, and maybe just to say a prayer for you one-to-one at the end. But for now, that's enough from me. Thanks everyone for coming here tonight. As I say, we're carrying on these Holy Week events, and so there's another one of these events happening tomorrow night, Good Friday, on Saturday as well, and of course on Sunday, Easter Day. We've got events morning and evening on Sunday on Easter Day. But for me, thanks very much, and thanks for listening.